afternoon. Oh, Hideki, you are still in UN.
Yes, I'm in Japan. Yes.
The background.
Yeah.
Hello, namaste.
Hello, namaste, namaste.
Hi, Anselmo.
Oh, Ingo, you look very cold. You are in Europe.
Hi, Ingo.
Europe is very cold.
Yes,
Ah,
it's
he did
autumn
a
now. Hi,
nice
everybody.
background.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Very interesting virtual background. One is the UN. So UN. Okay, can
Okay, I can change it.
Hi, Anselmo. Hi, Ingo. Hi, all.
But
Yeah.
Hello.
we can use all different.
Wow, new looks, new getup. Anselmo.
I have a
Oh.
new hairstyle.
Yeah.
I become a Buddhist monk. I become Buddhist monk.
हाँ अच्छा अच्छा चलो सही है
Okay, let me see. We have all the speakers in the room. Okay, let me. Okay, let me see whether all the speakers are here. We have the very interesting lineup. The Beckie and Ingo is here. Alyn, are you in the room? Seems we are lost. Just a minute. And Gia is here. Okay, so James, welcome. And Alyn is coming now. Gia, Sarah is online. Okay, so let's start. Let me use my PowerPoint. All right. Right, can you see the screen? It's okay?
Yep.
Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So welcome to the webinar number 6 of Asia Futures Forum. So my name is Anselmo Lee. I'm the regional coordinator of APSD, the one of the co-organizers. So let me introduce, there are many co-organizers of this meeting. Always we have been working together for more than 1 year about this Summit of the Future. So we have of course, Coalition for the UN We Need, GCAP, Global Call to Action Against Poverty, Asia TV Alliance, People's 20, Asia Center, Pact Romana IMCS, and also Ware Federalist Movement, YPA, and APSD many. So we are working together. Many of them are represented as a speaker in this the webinar. So let me introduce speakers. As you see, we have many because there are so many topics. So it's not possible for one person to cover all, you know. That's why we have invited 3 different groups. One group is more development, SDG and financing part. Second part is peace and security. Third part, youth. And then fourth part is digital. So I believe all the speakers, they will focus on the specific topics. Of course, Ingo and Beckie will cover overall, you know, overall, because they have been facilitating the civil society participation in this meeting. The agenda, obviously, we have Pact for the Future, Digital Compact, and then Declaration of Future Generations, and also CSO engagements. Let me introduce briefly. As you know, we had 2 preparatory meetings. One is a Regional People's Assembly, 9th of September. Unfortunately, Pradeep, who was a key coordinator of this meeting, he cannot attend today. And then we have a Global People's Assembly in New York during the summit, and the Ingo, and then several speakers like Gia and Hideki. Many of them were participating in this meeting, so they will share, you know, outcome of this meeting. And then just put our discussion in the broader context. I want to show the chronology and milestone, you know, especially those who are not familiar with this process. As you know, the whole process started from 2015, when SDG was adopted. And then we had the first SDG summit, 2019, once every 4 years. And then that year, we have an Alliance for Multilateralism. Not many people pay attention to this one. That time, it was an initiative of France and Germany. There was, I think, 2 or 3 years after Trump, the MAGA, you know, Make America Great Again, you know, so unilateralism, and also the Brexit. So some government taking initiative to strengthen the Alliance for Multilateralism, but this is not official UN process. Some like-minded governments, and this was the starting of all the discussion about 75th anniversary of UN 2020, and then they adopted declaration, and then 1 year later, the UN Secretary General came up with our common agenda as a response to this declaration about how to implement the declaration of UN General Assembly on 75th anniversary, and the series of summits. The first summit, Transforming Education Summit 2022, and then second SC Summit, because as you know, the Summit of the Future was supposed to take place 2023, but because of SC Summit, they decided to postpone by 1 year. That's why we had a summit this year, 2024, and then next year we have another summit, second, the Social Summit, and then 27, the last, third and last SDG Summit. Then we reach the final, the point of the 2030 agenda. So this is like a 15-year journey. So we are middle of this 50-year journey. So, and then when it comes to the summit itself, there was a UN Civil Society conference. They started 1 year ago. And then May this year, the UN Civil Society conference, official one in Nairobi. And then the last week we had finally the Summit of the Future and also Action Day. But when it comes to civil society, and we have now the Coalition for the UN We Need. Previously, it was as a UN 2020. So 2019, the UN 2020 was created to engage with the UN 75 And then later they changed the name, you know, from UN 2020 to Coalition for the UN We Need. Is more the long term, the platform. And then there was a series of meetings, Global Futures Forum, and also we had our own Asia Futures Forum. Many of you participated as the speakers. And then C4UN produced People's Pact for Future, and also the Regional Assembly and Global People's Assembly. And also, as already announced, we are going to have a face-to-face meeting next year, the January in Chiang Mai, to discuss not only the Summit of the Future, also other upcoming meetings like a social summit. So this is more or less the context where we are now. So I'm sure the many speakers, they will address some of the key events in the future and also in the past. So that's why I give this one as a background for those who are not familiar with this process. And then again, this is a detail, the Pact for the Future. So on the Sustainable Development Financing for Development, there's a 12 actions, concrete action plans. And then second, section 2, international peace and security. There are about 14 action, concrete action, number 13 to 27. This will be addressed by the Alyn and also partially by Hideki too, right? And then third section, the STI, Science, Technology, Innovation, and Digital Cooperation. I think James will more focus on this section 3. And the youth and future generation, we have 2 speakers who will speak about youth, the IMCS and also YPA. And then transforming global governance, these are cross-cutting. There are a lot from 38 to 50, 54, 56. And then I think all the speakers, they will, when they discuss their thematic or sector area, they also discuss relevant issues or actions on the global governance. So hopefully we can cover all, of course, not all the details, but more or less the 5 area, SDG, and peace, security, and digital, youth, and global governance. Okay, these are how we design today's meeting. So now, without further ado, let me invite the first speaker. But first speaker is the Beckie Malay, but I received the apologies this morning because her husband, not husband, sorry, her brother was very sick. So she has to take care of her brother in the hospital, you know. But she sent me the text. Prepared by the C4UN. So I will share in the chat box so you can read the hot talking point. Okay, then let's move straight to now next speaker, Ingo from GCAP. He will give us overview of what happened in New York and how has been the process, civil society engagement, and then his overall perspective about outcome. So now, Ingo, you have a floor, please.
Thank you, Anselmo. Hello, everybody. Okay, as Anselmo said, it's really quite a lot what is included. So good that there are different speakers to cover the different points. It will be a bit selective, but let me start with the final days of the negotiations for the Pact for the Future, and also then the Summit of the Future. So originally it was agreed that the Pact for the Future should be agreed by consensus and already before the Summit of the Future. So basically, you know, there were the different versions of the Pact for the Future, starting with the zero draft at the beginning of the year, and then there were different refs. So I think if I remember right, it was the 4th ref, which came out about a week before, and the co-facilitators, Germany and Namibia, they actually tried to have this as a final one and also gave it to the president of the General Assembly. But silent procedure was broken on that. And then they another attempt was made just a few days, I think probably the Thursday before the summit, just 3 days before, is another version, and then again, silent procedure was broken by a number of countries. No, sorry, on the week before it was really a big group. Then on this Friday before this summit, it was a smaller group of like-minded countries, like led by Pakistan on different points. But then actually more or less it was solved. So they had a final version for the beginning of the Summit of the Future on the Sunday, the 22nd. There were some changes made. You can see this in the document. I don't know whether you sent it to everybody, Anselmo, but maybe it would be good by the Global Policy Forum, prepared by Barbara Adams. She listed them quite accurately. So then on the day itself, so the first point of the agenda was basically to approve the Pact for the Future and the two annexes. But then Russia said the rest that they would they propose not to approve it, but to do it later because they think it's not basically a consensus on it. And then basically the group of African countries led by the Congo, DRC, they proposed not to basically accept this proposal of Russia. So and there was a vote on that, and there was a very big majority in favor of not to deal with this proposal of Russia. So there were only a few countries with Russia, I think 6 or 7, and then who voted in favor of the Russian proposal, and another around 6, 7 who abstained, and all the others voted in favor. And basically then on the next day, after the Pact for the Future was approved, Argentina said they are not accepting it, so they are not so they opted out. Even Russia said they accepted as this was agreed, but Argentina said they opt out. So this is the Agenda 2030 is basically a socialist agenda, and you can read this in the document. So that much for the beginning of the drama. But let me try to draw some general lines. So generally, I think there are different opinions from civil society on this, and I will refer to both. So the one is more general positive opinion that this Pact for the Future and the other annexes were approved. So and that this was possible despite all the geopolitical tensions. So that this is a clear expression and sign that the governments are interested in multilateralism. The big majority of countries, or one can even say very big, only a very few exceptions, were in favor, and especially that the African group showed that this is not only a Western agenda, like Russia said, but it's basically in the interest of the countries generally, and so the African group, as you know, they're also leading the process on the UN Tax Convention, and obviously there are different opinions, but I think the main point is that the UN is an important forum, and also that the UN should be the forum to solve or to make progress. So there's also a lot of agreement on the analysis on problems. So I come to the negative points in a minute, but just to mention a few positive actions. These are, let's say, examples. So action 4 says taxation of high net wealth individuals should be should be tried globally. This is also what happened in the G20, but there was a positive this is a positive mentioning here. Then action 34 demands universal social protection. So that's a bit of a discussion also between different actors. So it's important that it's universal. Then action 51 mentions the special drawing rights and proposes a rechanneling of at least 50% of unused special drawing rights, and also the allocation of new special drawing rights. That's also interesting. And also action 53 is demanding to go beyond GDP. So these are all positive examples. There could be more, but let me come to the more negative or to the critic. So in general said the ambition is quite low. So first of all, these are 56 actions, but it's a lot of wording, and one cannot often not really see what is actually the action here. It is called action, but it's not really clear what is actually planned. There are no time frames, no indicators, no monitoring. So this seems to be quite weak. Also, I mean, there was a criticism from the beginning that there are so many different topics. And in general, this is more a distraction of different processes like the financing for development process. But then also the concrete agreements are either, the ambition is either low or it is even partly wrong. So, for example, it's good to demand the reform of the international financial architecture, like the debt architecture. That's absolutely needed. But then it is said that the International Monitoring Fund should lead this process. But actually, the IMF is part of the problem and not part of the solution. So actually, the expectation was that the UN would lead this process. So you can see this how the language was weakened in this document from Barbara Adams. So from the different Res 1 to Res 5 or in the final agreed document, the language was often weakened, and it is understood that also, yeah, of course, there were different negotiations, but for example, the United States or maybe other countries from the global north were trying to make it weaker, and so that the UN is not playing such a strong role as actually we hoped as civil society. So yeah, let me come. I think maybe in terms of time to the civil society. You probably know that the civil society involvement in this whole process was quite weak. So I always compare with the negotiation for the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, when civil society was always in the room in the open working group. There it was possible to, of course, the government speak first, and the UN organizations and civil society could speak at the end of each point. And this time we were not in the room of the informals, but in separate events. So there was no real exchange between governments and civil society, except with the co-facilitators. So yeah, so that of course there was a civil society conference in Nairobi, that was maybe in general a positive step, but still we see this as a part of weakening civil society in UN processes. That's actually also one reason that we started to have the People's Assemblies from 2019 with the SDG Summit. So this year we had the Global People's Assembly on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th September in the UN Church Center, which is just opposite of the UN. And of course, this was basically the main civil society meeting. We had different views, exchange on the Summit of the Future, but also on the future processes, especially the financing for development, the World Social Summit, and also the climate processes leading to the COPs 29 and 30. So there was a lot of interest, also very good quality of inputs. And I mean, the interesting thing is that there were that civil society comes together despite all the differences we have. So I think that's basically a success. On the other hand, it was not possible to agree on an opinion, I mean, on a declaration. On the one hand, because they're basically quite different opinions on the whole process, Summit of the Future, Pact for the Future, but also one could say, as all these last minute changes were done, it was quite impossible to basically to react as civil society, and that's maybe a weakness for civil society in general. So, but I mean, of course, as Anselmo mentioned, there was an Asia People's Assembly, and this happened also in Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean, and there were National People's Assembly. So for us, we will continue this process and also to have the dialogue with governments. And this is actually one of the main points also of the Global People's Assembly was then to prepare for next year. So you mentioned the World Social Summit, which is of course very important for us in Qatar in November, but then the FFD4 conference end of June, beginning of July in Spain will be also the first major meeting. Then the COP30 in Brazil in November will be also very important. And what we are really looking for is or what we are trying is to see whether we can mobilize together, and we call it economic justice mobilization, where we combine all these different topics, which is basically, of course, the economic justice part, like the debt crisis, the tax situation, but also the governance of the international financial architecture, like World Bank and IMF, but also to connect this with the social and the climate parts. So like health, education, social protection, so and the climate funding. So we hope we can basically come to a joint mobilization, and that's the Global People's Assembly did discuss this also, and this was part of this process. Okay, so that much as a first overview. As I said at the beginning, there are many other parts which are really important, like the Security Council reform, and many others. So I hope others will cover them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ingo, very much. Would you mind sharing your talking point? Because I think not everybody can follow, what you said, because you mentioned about many meetings, all the jargons, but it's, not everybody is familiar with, or that's why I would like to ask you to share your talking points so people can read and then check. Okay.
Yeah, you mean in the chat, or yeah?
Yeah, chat box. You can directly put in the chat box. And also I put by listening to your presentation, I put 2 questions, but not now, later on, when you have time for Q&A. And you said the CSA engagement was not very strong and effective compared to the past, especially the SDG summit. And why? And the first question. Second one is, we have a Global People's Assembly in New York in parallel with the summit, but you are not able to produce a statement. So what were the contentious issues which you could not agree, among CSOs? So these are the two questions. And then please write down your question in the chat box and comment so that the speakers can respond to your questions and the comment after all the presentations. Now, I'm happy to invite Alyn Ware. You're also in New York, very actively engaging, and then inside, outside the UN buildings. Now, Alyn, you have a floor to share your view, especially about the action related to the peace and security.
Well, thank you very much, Anselmo, and greetings to everybody. The picture behind me makes look as I'm outside the UN in New York, but actually I'm calling today from Hamburg, where I'm at the Hamburg Sustainability Forum. And this is one of the places where we're trying to ensure that there's a follow-on from the Pact for the Future, Declaration of Future Generations, and the Global Digital Compact, which were adopted at the Summit of the Future. And obviously there's some other places where we want to ensure that there's follow-on as well, because we don't want the Summit of the Future to be a standalone conference that produces a few declarations and then nothing much happens. We want to make use of the opportunities that's provided to pick up these issues and take them forward.
Sorry,
so just a little bit about... Yeah.
Everybody's okay? Because there's a lot of noise in your mic.
I'm sorry, I'm at the conference, so I'm not too sure how I can stop that.
Okay, I understand. You are outside, okay? Okay, it's okay. Please go ahead.
Sorry, apologies for the background noise. I just ducked out of the conference to join the webinar. So just briefly about myself. So I am the program director with the World Future Council, also program director with the World Federalist Movement Institute for Global Policy, and the global coordinator of parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. And as preparation for the Summit of the Future, we participated in the consultations that were organized by Coalition for a UN Need, which was a very broad network of participating organizations, hundreds and hundreds from around the world. And that coalition had emerged from the 75th anniversary of the UN and facilitating civil society engagement in it. I was also involved in the impact coalitions, which were established at the UN Civil Society Conference in Nairobi. And these impact coalitions were also to build cooperation amongst civil society for the Summit of the Future. So the three of the impact coalitions, which I'm co-convener of, is the Earth Governance Impact Coalition, the Just Institutions, International Court of Justice, and the Future Generations Impact Coalition. So I'm going to draw from a lot of that networking and consultation and engagement with civil society in 5 key points in terms of what happened and what we can take forward. Firstly, from the more general side of peace and security, the Coalition for the UN Need, after a year of consultations, regional consultations, thematic consultations, a number of drafts, came up with a People's Pact for the Future as like a joint cooperative advocacy tool for the Summit of the Future. So here you can find it on the Coalition for the UN webpage. Download is the download button for that. And that had sections in it which mirrored the sections of the Pact for the Future. So the People's Pact for the Future took up the same sections. The section I was very involved in was peace and international security. And in there we had a number of recommendations that included improving, strengthening the UN General Assembly, particularly as a counter to the Security Council when the veto power is used in the Security Council, reviewing and firstly restricting and finally phasing out the veto power in the Security Council, building a more egalitarian and equal and representative Security Council, strengthening the International Court of Justice as the principal judicial organ for the United Nations, and then also some areas on disarmament, including nuclear disarmament, and better peacekeeping, including elevating the peacekeeping to a council and establishing a permanent standing peacekeeping or peace managing unit or monitoring. Different terms were used for it. Some call it the UN Emergency Peace Service. So these were the key recommendations in Chapter 2 of the People's Pact for the Future. Some of them got picked up by the Pact of the Future, with the governments. So I'll just mention a couple of those. And then I'll move on to environmental issues we will also advance in. So on nuclear disarmament and nuclear war prevention, the Pact for the Future was quite strong on the commitment of governments never to start a nuclear war, to prevent nuclear war, to keep the norm of the non-use of nuclear weapons alive, to reaffirm that a nuclear war could not be won and must never be fought. That was good. What it didn't do was then call on implementing policy to ensure that that actually happens, because there's a big gap between what the government say they're doing, trying to prevent nuclear war, and what they're actually doing with their nuclear policies, including specific threats and use of nuclear weapons, first use policies. So one of the big calls from the People's Pact for the Future was that governments, all of the nuclear armed states, as a first step, should adopt no first use. That didn't get into the Pact for the Future, but it's strong in the People's Pact. And there's a whole coalition of organizations from around the world called No First Use Global that's taking this forward and will be continuing on this. So that's on nuclear risk reduction. Then on nuclear disarmament, in the Pact for the Future, the governments reaffirm their commitment to the elimination of nuclear weapons. But it was a very weak confirmation. There was no time frame. There's no process on achieving it. In the People's Pact for the Future, we said there needs to be a time frame agreed, that nuclear weapon states and allied states should agree to the global elimination of nuclear weapons no later than the 100th anniversary of the United Nations. And there's a big coalition and campaign around this. There's the Hiroshima governor launching a project to ensure that nuclear disarmed is part of the next round of the Sustainable Development Goals, which runs until 2045. And so we're cooperating on that. And one of the best ways to get involved in that, if you're interested, I'll just see if I can get it, is Unfold Zero, which is a coalition of organizations working on the elimination of nuclear weapons. This is putting up the updates on these initiatives and how they've been taken forward in the different bodies. One, then you subscribe to the Unfold Zero newsletter. You do it online, or you just contact me. That's the best way of keeping in touch with those campaigns on nuclear risk reduction and disarmament. I'll move on to the next one now, which is the International Court of Justice. And we have established a global campaign called Law Not War, Legal Alternatives to War, which is emphasizing the importance of the International Court of Justice and other judicial bodies, but particularly the International Court of Justice, which was established by the UN under the Charter as a principal body for states to be able to resolve their conflicts through law, not through war. If diplomacy doesn't work, if it's failing, that doesn't mean you go to war. You can then take your case, your dispute, to the International Court of Justice, and it provides a fair, a detailed process for evaluating the facts, for applying the law, and for coming up with decisions. The good thing about the International Court of Justice, which a lot of people don't understand or don't realize, is that it's had a very successful track history. In that of the 195 decisions that it's made, over 80% of them have been accepted by all parties and implemented. Not always willingly, not always straight away, but this is a very good track record. Of course, there are a few exceptions one can point to, but in the majority of cases, it's been very effective. And this has included many cases where it's been a less powerful country, a small developing country against a more powerful country, whether like Nicaragua versus the United States, for example, where the United States was leading like an armed revolution against the Nicaraguan government. Nicaragua won the case. It actually forced the United States to stop their policy and helped pave the way for the Central American Peace Accords. Well, from my own country, New Zealand, we're not a very powerful country. We took France, a very powerful country, to court over the testing of nuclear weapons, blowing up nuclear weapons, lots of radiation in the Pacific. We, based on that decision, those cases in the court forced France to end its nuclear testing and close down its test site. So there's many examples. So in the Pact for the Future, the governments only gave small support for the International Court of Justice. They just said governments should ensure that they implement their obligations as laid down by the court. That's good. What it didn't say, so what we're saying is that every country in the world should accept the jurisdiction of the court. At the moment, 75 countries accept it. We want every country to. That will really help ensure that it's a more effective tool. So that's the Law Not War campaign, and I'll show you that one later. Now then finally, I'll just go on to the couple of environmental issues that were involved through the Earth Governance Impact Coalition. Two of them, and the way you can keep involved in that or up to date is through mobilizing an Earth Governance. Here it's mobilizing the Earth Governance Alliance. We have a newsletter and we host the Earth Governance Impact Coalition. One of the key campaigns for this is to ask the UN General Assembly to declare a planetary emergency about the climate crisis, but also the other environmental crises, and convene a planetary emergency platform. We can't wait for the Security Council, which is biased anyway. We know we've got an International Court of Justice case coming on climate change, but that's going to take a little while. And we need to get much better cooperate. COP's not doing it. They get COP's, the Conference of Parties, the climate convention is always the lowest common denominator. So we need to have something more focused, more directed, and build cooperation with the governments. So planetary emergency platform would do that. It was originally in the Pact for the Future, but some governments didn't like it. So that was pulled out, but it means it's got a lot of traction with the government. So we're doing a campaign around that. The other one, which was originally in the Declaration for Future Generations, but then got pulled back just noting the proposal, is for the UN Secretary General to appoint a special envoy for future generations and for governments at different levels, whether it's city governments, national governments, regional governments, should also establish representatives of future generations. This could be a commissioner for future generations, like Wales has done, or an ombudsperson for future generations, like Gibraltar and Hungary have done, or a parliamentary committee or commission on future generations. Finland's got that, for example, as have some other parliaments. There are already some good examples, but they're too few. So this would work very well in helping build planning and protection of future generations, protecting the environment, protecting peace, protecting human rights for future generations, along with better planning and management at the UN level. So we can continue the campaign for this. The UN Secretary General can do it. It doesn't have to have the agreement of the UN General Assembly, just needs to feel that there's enough traction and support for it. And I think we'll wrap up there because that's quite a lot. And again, if you want to keep involved in the Earth governance campaigns, because there are a couple of other ones also, such as like with Earth Trusteeship, then you can sign up to the mega newsletter on the Mobilising Earth Governance Alliance platform. Anselmo, thank you so much, and back to you for the comments from me.
Okay, thank you very much, Alyn. So you try very hard in spite of all the difficult environments. If you have any talking point or material, could you please share? Because some part I wasn't able to listen very well. So maybe your talking point will help us to understand, some missing parts. Okay, so let's continue. So now the section 2, international peace and security, more or less covered by the Alyn. Please feel free to put down your comment question. I already put one, what is my question to you, but not now. So after presentation, what is your final assessment? There are several areas. Some are saying, there's a progress, regress, stagnant, no progress at all. So compared to other, international finance architecture and digital, what is, the area, the peace and security, what is your comparative analysis and assessments? So this is the one question. Second one is, you mentioned about 2045, but that part was not very clear, because there is a noise. Could you please elaborate in the chat box or later on about campaign linked to 2045, 100th anniversary of UN? Okay, thank you. So let's go to the next speaker. According to program, now let me invite the Hideki Wakabayashi, Think Lobby, the Janik from Japan, who was also in New York. Please share also your experience in New York, and then your presentation. So you're going to use a PowerPoint, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so you can use it. Yep.
Okay, just a minute.
Okay, now it's good. Yep.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for your introduction. My name is Hideki Wakabayashi. I'm a board member of Japan NGO Center for International Cooperation, JANIC, and also director of Think Lobby. Think Lobby is a think tank department within the JANIC. And I'm also former chair of the ADA 2 years ago, but now I'm advisor. So I have been working on the Summit of the Future since January. I think it's a zero draft was launched with as a member of Forus and also SDGs Japan task team members since then. And we had several meetings with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Forus members and other stakeholders, and especially Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we asked them to incorporate our opinion feedback into the Pact for the futures several times. It seems to be that a lot of points that were incorporated into the draft finally. But of course, the Pact for the future is still weak, but they're very ambitious. But the point is how we could implement those actions we agreed. And we like to focus on a little bit East Asia Security Council reform and what was the relationship between the global governance and development. And United Nations is not functioning as intended in the UN chapters. Based on the international cooperation and based on the multilateralism. And especially to me, Security Council is not functioning using veto in some countries. And I heard that some strong criticism about Security Council in the Action Days event. And some people, I still remember that the African ambassador says, veto, Security Council using veto is undemocratic because of the United Nations is a democratic organization. So I think Security Council is very much needed to reform. And the United Nations is not functioning and rising regional tensions. Regional tension is rising over security in East Asia. And as a result, in Japan, in the case of Japan, security budget has been increasing and ODA budget is decreasing. So this is a reform of the Security Council is urgent with a delay. And primary cause of the current chaotic situation seems to stem from the failure of global governance, especially the Security Council. And again, veto of the P5 is undemocratic practice that contradicts the values of the democratic United Nations. In the Pact of the Future, equitable representation and increase the SC members, especially African people insist that the 2 seats are needed for African and other developing countries, and of course, Asia and Pacific Island. And that clearly said that the question of the veto is key element of the Security Council reform. Strengthen the relationship with the Global Assembly. I have been monitoring the Security Council reform for 20 years or so, but it's still vague. But this time, reform of the Security Council, it has more specific and clear. I think people think that we can no longer afford to postpone the Security Council reform. So I think, to me, especially high expectations in the Pact for the Future. And this is a Japanese ODA outcome. This is OECD results, and Japan is still number 3rd within ODA OECD country. This is a GNI 0.7% GNI target, but still 0.39, which is lower than average and far lower than 0.07%. But ODA budget has been decreasing. And compared to the 1997 level, Japan was a top donor in the world at the time, but now half of the 1997 level is very low, and only 7% of the defense budget right now. And Japanese defense budget has been increasing, especially last 3 years or so, because this is a growing potential for military conflict in East Asia. As you might know that the United States and China are confronting in East Asia. And there are many American bases in Japan, South Korea, and of course, Taiwan is allied of the United States. And there are many naval ports along the coast. And there's a South China Sea. And to me, Chinese military forces putting pressure on East Asia, such as frequent invasion of the other country territories. Chinese military drills surrounding Taiwan, China, and Philippine territorial dispute in the Spratly Islands, repeated North Korean ballistic missiles launches into the Japan Sea, and Northern Territory issues with Russia, which we cannot see from this map. And I have to say that the geopolitical divisions are intensified in East Asia. So what we should do to stabilize peace and finance for development in the region. But I think we have to understand the realities of international politics and security, which is very necessary. We, civil society, sometimes tend to the only one side of the aspect, neglecting other side. But what's happening right now in East Asia, this is a reality that we have to look. But at the same time, international cooperation is indispensable for the eliminating any kinds of threats, such as extreme poverty, protecting basic freedom, solving structure problem to stabilize the region based on the multilateralism. So 2030 agenda for sustainable development says there can be no sustainable development without peace and no peace without sustainable development. So I think we need to gain public support for strengthening development finance, because we ask some Japanese people that we need defense more strongly and try to cut the decrease the ODA budget. That's kind of reality that we are facing right now. So I think we need to gain public support to strengthen development finance in East Asia and everywhere in the world. So need to appeal realistic logic for regional stability with ODA. What will be the best mixture for peace between international cooperation for development and national security? This is very important. And CSO should continue to work on not only the finance for development, but reform the global governance by participating in the international discussion at UN and everywhere. UN was created for people. UN Charter in the preamble begins with the peoples of the United Nations determined. Thank you very much. Back to Anselmo.
Okay, thank you very much, Hideki. I didn't know that you have been working on Security Council reform 20 years. We never
Yes.
discussed that. Why
Yes.
we are working together, ODA, you know? Okay, good to know. Let's discuss more about security issues, which is a
Okay.
real issue in this region, you know, Japan, South Korea, and East Asia,
Yes.
especially Nexus, the SCG, and disarmament, and security, and so on. So thank you very much for enlightening us. So now let's go to the next speaker. Next speaker is Gia from ADA, Asia Development Alliance. Gia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Anselmo. I would like to thank for organizing this Asia Future Forum. We at ADA remain engaged with the process through Global People Assembly, Regional People Assembly, and then we also did a couple of National People Assemblies with the support of GCAP, and ADA also remained part of Forest Working Group on Summit of the Future. So we were following up these conversations around Nairobi conference and also Summit of the Future in the New York. So I'm just sharing with you a couple of my observations, and these observations are calculated and observed through our conversations in various side events, as well as the Global People Assembly and forest interventions. I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen.
Yes, yes, yes.
Can you see my screen?
Oh, very a lot. So confused. Oh, now it's okay.
Now it's okay?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay. So thank you. The Summit of the Future actually this time adopted Pact for the Future without consensus, as Ingo already said. 143 countries were in favor, 7 were against, and what we have observed is that none of the Asian country was against this time, but 15 countries were in abstention, including 8 from Asia. And this is quite interesting for us as ADA. China, Kazakhstan, Laos PDR, Malaysia, Maldives, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, and Thailand. They were the countries which did not actually took part in the voting process, though they were engaged in the other processes. The Pact for the Future adopts almost 56 action points to reiterate its commitment to multilateralism, international cooperation, sustainable development, peace, security, and human rights. But unfortunately, Pact for the Future does not outline any mechanism and timelines for the reforms to achieve the agenda. As the other colleagues said today, that without having any clear timeline and mechanism towards the implementation, the pact would not have that much of impact. However, there were like certain important inclusions and agendas which were included in the Summit of the Future and in the Pact for the Future that I would like to highlight today. The Pact demands reforms in global financial architecture, and these demands have been included in the Action 47 to Action 53. The pact also includes the language to strengthen the representation of developing countries in global economic decision-making processes and forums included in Action 48. The pact also commits to reduce the SDG financing gap that has been committed in Action 49. You know that the UN Secretary General also called for this stimulus package for SDG as to support the SDGs implementation. So that has been also considered in this Action 49 to reduce the SDG financing gap. The pact also commits to promote sustainable borrowing practices and asking IMF to review the sovereign debt architecture under Action 50. The pact also commits to move beyond GDP as primary measure of progress, Action 53. And the pact also reaffirms commitment on pledges to transit away from fossil fuels and enhance the use of renewable energy by 2030 and achieve zero carbon by 2050. So these were like some of the important commitments made under the Pact for the Future. The Pact also acknowledged the role of civil society in peace building. But there are several major limitations of the Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future observed by the civil society at large who attended the processes. The Summit of the Future and Pact failed to take appropriate measures to introduce reforms in the UN system, though we have seen that they have suggested some reforms. in the Security Council, but those reforms are not inclusive. I can refer the Finland's president speech. I was in the GA hall when the Finland's president was speaking towards the reforms of the Security Council, and he was very strongly talking about the inclusion of 5 more members in the Security Council, 2 from Asia, 2 from Africa, and 1 from Latin America. And he was also very strongly talking about the veto power and making UN systems more democratic. So that was quite interesting, and I think that he was the only head of the state who was talking about the UN Security Council and the UN reforms agenda. The Summit of the Future and Pact for the Future also failed to commit any concrete action to address climate crisis and to support vulnerable nations with immediate climate financing. So this is also challenging in, I think, hopefully in the coming months when we will be discussing this agenda during FFD4, probably this would also come into consideration that how the world will be thinking about climate financing. The Summit of the Future and the Pact failed to ensure the meaningful participation of human rights defenders, civic rights activists, and social movements. As Ingo and other colleagues have already shared, the Pact also failed to commit mechanisms to ensure the protection of civic rights and spaces, because this is one of the important challenge. Without the inclusion of the civil society at large, no agenda can be successful. The Summit of the Future and the Pact also failed to highlight the role of civil society for better governance and accountability. The states does recognize the role of civil society, but they did not recognize the role of civil society in governance and accountability mechanisms. The Summit of the Future and the Pact also failed to address and provide safeguards against the militarization and weaponization of digital technologies, though there were like action points on action agendas on digital governance, but this part, particularly the militarization and weaponization of digital technologies, were not addressed exclusively in the Pact of the Future. The Summit of the Future and the Pact failed to outline implementation at national level and voluntary accountability mechanism like we have observed for the SDGs. Like we know that the HLPF is the process which allows states to share their voluntary national reviews, but there is no mechanism set forth in this summit of the future to hold the commitment to account around the Pact for the Future. Concerning the CSO engagement, as I've shared that the national, regional, and global people assemblies were held, GCAP, ADA, Torres, PDA, and many other forums from across the globe were part of that. ADA and PDA remained part of the side events on ODA and for Finance for Development that was organized by Torres. ADA and PDA also joined hands together with the Global People Assembly and attended Unmute Civil Society side event that was held inside the United Nations headquarters. Otherwise, no substantial consultative process was carried out at national and regional level on the Pact for the Future. Earlier, we have observed that for the Agenda 2030 and for the SDGs, I remember in 2013 and 2014, we were engaged extensively by the global community, and only in Pakistan, we were able to hold 60 consultations, and we We know that more than 200,000 consultations were held across the globe. But for this particular Pact for the Future and for the Summit of the Future, we haven't seen that much of mobilization and engagement. When we see this process where they invited civil society organization in Nairobi, many CSOs were complaining about the meaningful participation in the process. The CSO representatives were sharing that they were even not able to enter into those like halls because the space was not that much available and they were sitting outside in the cafes. So visiting Nairobi and sitting in the cafes doesn't mean anything. So that was the level of participation of the civil society organizations. Most of the submissions of the CSOs and their respective forums shared during the review processes, there were like 4 or 5 review processes, were least considered in the forum, in the Pact of the Future. Suggestion for the future, civil society should initiate a strong movement at national, regional, and global level to remind leaders about their commitment under the Pact for the Future. Align the civil society advocacy efforts with 6 points call to action. You know that United Nations Secretary General towards the end of this also shared 6-point call to action. And I think the civil society should align its action agenda with those 6 points to follow up on Pact for the Future. The civil society should take a collective position to influence decision makers in the forthcoming key moments like FFD4 and Social Summit, etc. Citizens at large need to be sensitized and engaged on the implementation processes of the Pact for the Future. Here are some of the pictures. This picture actually shares the key issues on the role of civil society engagement at the UN. This side event was held inside the United Nations headquarters. This picture shows you the Global People Assembly. This is also, a stunt during the Global People Assembly. And then there was a meeting with the European parliamentarians in the sidelines of the Global People Assembly and the Summit of the Future. Here you can also see that the civil society was quite vocal about the challenges they are facing in terms of their participation. Some side events, the forums organized one dinner for the participants, some more pictures on Global People Assembly and inside the United Nations. Here you can see that there were like a couple of national events that was organized. PDA organized one National People Assembly. You can see some pictures over there. So thank you very much indeed, Anselmo. I will be available for the questions and answers.
Okay, thank you very much, Gia. I put 2 questions because you were there in New York. One is about your personal experience, atmosphere, compared to the Summit of the Future. You are frequent the visitor, the UN, I know. So what's your view, impression compared to the past? And then the why, the many were complaining, because there's no enthusiasm, there's a cynical, so why? What is your analysis? Second one is, and we have 2 speakers later on from the youth group, but they were not there in New York, How was the youth participation actually, Was it really substantive or again the token or window dressing, So where was so your sharing will be very, very helpful after the listening to all the presentation, okay? So let me go to the next speaker. Next speaker is, as you see in the program, Sarah Torres, Reality of Age. She gave us the video presentation. So let me use let me see. This one. Okay. Okay, can you see the video?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I am Torres from the Reality of Aid Asia Pacific, a network of CSOs working on aid and development cooperation. As you know, our region is grappling with the adverse impacts of multiple worsening and intersecting crises of food insecurity, hunger, and climate catastrophes, exacerbated by rising authoritarianism among our countries. In fact, prior to the finalization of Pact for the Future that aims to fill the gaps of sustainable development goals, severe flooding caused by Typhoon Yagi devastated thousands of residential areas in Hanoi, Vietnam. And a week after the Summit of the Future, Israel launched massive bombing attacks across Lebanon, displacing thousands of families, all while simultaneously pushing Palestinians off their lands and killing innocent children. If not natural calamities, it is war and genocide that continue to regress the world and its people. It's been apparent how the years of multilateralism has failed to serve the SDGs. We've seen how geopolitical and profit-oriented interests prevailed over the genuine and sustainable development that everyone deserves. We've seen it from major policymaking spaces, where the private sector is gradually taking over the lead in financing and development. We've seen it in communities where indigenous peoples are displaced, women experience gender-based violence, and militarization is intensifying. And I'm afraid that we will continue to witness all of these despite the outcome trifecta documents of the summit. The Reality of Asia Pacific believes then that the Summit of the Future overall is still geared towards maintaining the status quo, if not retrograde. The future it apparently perceives is just a hamster ball of the present with the same systems, approaches, and policies that are shaping development today. So despite the attempts to synthesize the priorities in achieving the SDGs, the Pact document is still yet to adhere to actual transformative actions, especially in mobilizing development finance that is not centered, dependent, and anchored to privatization and international financial institutions. Donor countries are still being held over the same standards despite consistently failing to meet their official development assistance threshold. Conditional loans are still pinning developing countries down into debt distress through austerity policies in the guise of expediting the achievement of SDGs. With the ongoing and worsening conflict sprawling in the global south, the Summit of the Future is still limited in addressing the alarming trajectory of militaristic ambitions of the US, China, and Russia. Demilitarization as a term is nowhere to be found or acknowledged in the Pact, and global sanctions for such nations that are leading, funding, and arming wars and military expansions are yet to be recognized and reflected. Although there is consensus among CSOs that the Pact acknowledges the power imbalance in global governance, a fair playing field among multilateral institutions, state and non-state actors, civil society organizations, and local communities is still far-fetched. So long as the development agenda does not adhere to a people-centered and people-led development, the summit will not realize the promises of an inclusive and sustainable development. So as a network of civil society organizations across Asia Pacific, we are also dismayed with the shrinking civic spaces and the rise of authoritarian governments in the region that hamper the work we do. Across national governments are laws being implemented to silence dissent and curtail people's rights. And although international peace and security is one of the main pillars of the summit, it still lacks the necessary actions to root out and address the main causes of attacks in communities and civic spaces. CSOs have tried to lobby their recommendations to the summit, but it extends to a more concerning and diminishing role of the civil society in compelling their respective national governments to implement, enforce, and align their policies with the Pact. CSOs will always conduct advocacy work at the grassroots level and partner with local communities to support in advancing their own development. But the outcomes of the summit have to be translated in every space, especially in regional and national legislations that could potentially create a more binding chance for these aspirations to live up to its promises, despite the presence of gaps and lack of solid reforms. So overall, we believe that there is a consensus among all the actors that we are truly behind from achieving Agenda 2030. With the upcoming COP29 this year and the financing for development fourth conference next year, or FFP4, we reaffirm our calls to a more sustainable financing, one that is not driven by private investments, but instead mobilized by public finance. It is also time to acknowledge that pushing donor countries to uphold their ODA commitment is not enough. There has to be a political will to recognize all these billions of unpaid ODA as aid debt. For instance, we should push the UN to advance a process toward the UN Convention on International Development Cooperation. This is to ensure that the Global North will be obligated to pay what they owe to the Global South. Development cooperation, understood as reparations, is fair and just in the face of centuries of colonialism and exploitation. IFIs should also do their part, and this is not through further increasing and broadening their role and the private sector's role in development projects, including in climate and humanitarian actions. Therefore, the international financial architecture must be transformed in ways that it would not cause further debt distress to already debt-burdened developing countries. They too must also be held accountable for their rights violations among communities that resulted from austerity policies and other conditionalities. There must be a truly independent body not attached to these IFIs, monitoring their transparency and accountability, as well as addressing people's complaints filed against them. As CSOs, we have to leverage these spaces in fundamentally shifting and shaping the architecture of financing and development cooperation. We will continue to pressure these institutions and their mandate to demilitarize every community, equip public financing, and let local people lead their own development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I will share with you the text of the whole speech as soon as I get. Then let's move to the next one. Now, so far we have been discussing the overall framework and also peace and security and SDG financing. But now let's move into the new area, global digital compact, which is a new issues, which was not properly addressed in the SDG 2015. That's why this was the one of the main discussions, but still a lot of issues still remain to be discussed and resolved. But let's see, where we are now, the compact. So I'm happy to invite James Gomez, Asia Center, to share his view about this global compact. James, you have a floor, please.
Yeah, hi everyone, great to see you. David from Asia Center will help share the presentation. But in the meantime, I just wanted to maybe put 3 to 4 points for your consideration. Some observations that I think we need to keep in mind. One, I think I will use the term acceleration. There's a series of technological innovation and change that would lead to acceleration. Why this is important for us as civil society groups is simply because this acceleration will have an impact a lot on digital rights, surveillance, and freedom of expression online. So I'm good. I think we're going to see an acceleration of the challenges. So that's one. Secondly, a lot of the discussion in the technology sphere, and I've attended quite a lot of meetings, and most recently with Amazon, the Amazon Summit in Jakarta. It's always about public-private partnership when it comes to technology. So as a couple of colleagues have observed earlier, civil society is absent in this discussion. It is not unusual if you walk in to find that there's no civil societies. It's just government, public, and private sector. In fact, what we see in these spaces is the emergence of for-profit social enterprises and similar type of entities almost taking over the role of civil society in this space. So that's an interesting phenomenon. to observe. So while we may say, civil society is not present or is thin or is less, but I think we also need to observe the presence of another type of actor. Last but not least, I want to make a special mention of AI. I think, evolutions about AI and its impact on civil society rights and all that is still rather new, novel, not really discussed. I think it's still too early. I know although many groups have, talked about AI in elections and a few other things, it's still fairly new. But the thing to keep in mind here is, unlike the internet and social media where civil society were in the forefront, leading the way, using it for freedom of expression and other things, you will see when it comes to AI, the civil society is nowhere to be seen. In this, technological way, civil society is not seen, and if it is very, very way behind and very, very inadequate. So that I think is quite telling and dangerous as well. So I'll just quickly, I just have a few slides just to highlight. So if I can go to the next slide. Yeah, so a quick introduction about Asia Center. Asia Center position itself as a practice-based, research institute. We have, ECOSOC status. We have offices in 3 countries, in Bangkok, Cambodia, and Johor Bahru. And today I'm speaking to you from our Johor Bahru office. Next, please. So, as far as the global context is concerned, it's about closing the digital divide. It's about inclusion for the benefits of digital economy. It's about fostering a safe digital space, and about data governance and artificial intelligence, right? But what I want to suggest here, the role of civil society in these objectives and being a champion for it, it's weak, right? In fact, what you have here is governments and technology companies very strong in the space. Their approach about the digital divide is about, okay, how can governments subsidize access to the difficult to reach areas? And if technology companies are providing resources for this space to close the gap, it's all about skilling. It's about, how we can, provide training and train people to pick up digital jobs, right? But there are challenges in this space because it's not about training. It's about the attitude of, new school leavers and their desire to work in the space in the first place, and whether they have resilience to take up an entry-level job in the digital economy. So that's really the challenge, right? But where the discussion is mostly about skilling young people to that, to enter the digital workforce, and then finally about artificial intelligence. Like I said, the discussion is mostly between government and private sector, and civil society is almost non-existent. Next, please. So I think where we will see, key issues as far as the kinds of issues, civil society will be increasingly wanting to look at is, the use of laws. I have two panels of icons, but the first panel is really about laws. And in this suite of laws, what is missing is, laws around data protection and privacy. So in many countries, that's where the gap is. And as AI becomes more intrusive, I think this is where the challenge is. In the second row, what I want to point out is we are in a situation where most jurisdictions, exercise self-inhibiting behaviors when it comes to issues related to technology and openness. Tech companies are conservative, want to do business, they want to do business with government. So they also have less money to spend on. We spoke earlier, I think, about Japan reducing its ODA. You might also want to take note that technology companies are also, not spending so much money on, supporting, the not-for-profit sector, as they did a few years ago in projects and issues related to rights. So broadly, what we see now is very, very self-inhibiting behaviors by development agencies as well as tech companies. So what is the consequence of that? The consequence of that is there's really very little opportunity for CSOs that promote digital rights and also digital security for their constituents. There's very little support. And because of self-inhibiting behaviors, such entities are no longer recipients of funds from technology companies, or neither are they included in all this public-private partnership discussions. So I think that's another gap one has to recognize. Next, please. There's a lot of discussions about, AI. So it's about, the laws around AI, government investment. Because you see, when government invests in AI or ChatGPT, what they really want is the information that AI can pull out of the World Wide Web should be favorable towards them. So it's a form of advanced, censorship or propaganda. So I think, when governments are investing into AI or ChatGPT, one has to be clear what is the agenda. And really there is a lack of, expertise to monitor this, this whole area. And therefore, I think what is missing, a big gap that we see from the work that we do here at HSN or technology is there's no digital transformation of CSOs to be sort of, not just AI ready, but, to get ready for the acceleration and the impact it will have on rights. Which is the next slide here. It's about, I think we are talking about a new set of capacity building for CSOs. The need for a whole digital transformation from knowledge to using tools. Unless CSOs and its personnel, across the sector are skilled, and that requires some time, for digital transformation to take place, you will be limited to just one or two key individuals who may be a little bit better read and so on to maybe articulate or engage, sporadically on issue. But I don't think, we are there in terms of a sectorial change, right? Because in short, as I flagged in the beginning, the whole sector is left behind because they are not fluent in AI compared to the time when it was internet, social media, civil society is the back foot. So this is a big gap in terms of skilling and transformation for CSOs. Next, please. So I began with acceleration. So I want to just end by saying, okay, where are the acceleration points that has been identified? I think we will continue to have phishing scams, but very, very sophisticated, very, very detailed, very, very targeted. Artificial intelligence will, increase cyber attacks, and fake news exponentially. There's also quantum computing that will increase the speed of computing. Right now, when we talk about digital security, we talk about, computers, laptop, handphone. But as the Internet of things increases from, digital cars, watches, and more devices that will be Internet connected, the attacks and breaches of security will come more from the wearables and so on. Cloud security also will be an increased target of attack, as most of our storage goes to cloud. So this is also another area. And finally, when we become dependent on the internet and cloud and other types of software, the rise in ransom and online extortion, cyber extortion will increase, right? And there is a picked up trend about, shutting organizations down, either asking for financial ransomware demand or simply to cripple you. So these are the trends to watch for. And I guess that's a wrap for me, Anselmo, and thank you very much, and back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, James. I think you summarized all the key points for laymen like me. I think I see there are a lot of challenges. I think we need to really work together, with the like Asia Center, that has a technical expertise and also political perspective. And because this is really huge challenge and hopefully the opportunity for CSOs coming years. So let's go to the next two speakers. They are not the least. And there are two speakers from youth about youth. Youth was also one of the big issue, main agenda, like a digital. So now we have two speakers. First, Bertha from IMCS, IYTC Chiang Mai. Could you please introduce what is IYTC? And you have a PowerPoint, right? Okay, very good.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, okay, very good. Thank you.
Let me share the screen. Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity. So I represent the youth students movement, IMCS Pact Romana, and together with our International Youth Training Center, IYTC in Chiang Mai, Thailand. And reflecting on the Summit of the Future, so there are key achievements that talk about these are the three key outcomes highlight that we reflect from the movement. First is the Summit of the Future emphasize framework, the strong framework to protect the future by addressing the issue that we are currently also in the youth movement talking about, the climate change, the youth involvement, and then technology regulation. And so this is vital. This is important for IMCS as well as for IYTC, as for our commitment to peace building and sustainable development. And then the next one, commitment to youth empowerment. So from the achievement, the UN Summit of the Future, focusing on expanding opportunities for young people to engage in international dialogue, policy making. So this point resonates with our mission for the youth empowerment. And the last, the third key outcomes on the climate actions, the summit emphasized strongly on the urgent climate actions and sustainability, climate resilience, or resonates to IMCS and IYTC youth empowerment missions and climate resilience program. However, based on our reflections during this process and outcomes, there are few points here for the engagements of the CSOs and the process. The first on the lack of concrete youth-centrist outcomes, where the youth who participates in the process but only for limited to the participations. There is the result in absence of the concrete. There's limited actionable outcomes for young people, such as advancing the youth leadership or securing the funding for youth initiatives. And for the civil society participation, we can see there is a high visibility and involvement of the civil society in the process, including the youth groups during the Summit of the Future. But overall, the major decisions, their influence on the major decisions was minimal. So it's there is a gap between the feasibility and the real impact on policy outcomes. And with that, we have, from the reflections of the process and the key outcomes from the Summit of the Future in terms of youth, there are key recommendations for the follow-up and participation were based on the Summit of the Future, that there will be a conference on financing for development in 2025. So for this particular agenda, how we can strengthen the youth leadership at this forum by advocate for increased youth representation in discussions on financing sustainability development, and particularly for climate action and education or empowerment. And the second one, to promote the social inclusion at the second social summit in November 2025, where to work towards shaping the agenda for social protection system. And last, for the COP13 in November 2025, how we can collaborate with the other youth organizations to work and to ensure that climate actions is youth inclusive and emphasizing on the climate justice for vulnerable population. So the next step or the planning for these recommendations as the youth organization, first to build the alliance among the civil societies and youth groups that work for the climate actions and social justice, and the capacity building of there were several speakers before me have been talk about the capacity building. So indeed, this is need for the youth groups, or as well as for the to prepare the youth for the active participation in global forums. And then the third, on the engagement roadmap, how we can design an engagement roadmap for the youth leaders to participate in the previous slide at the events for international, the global dialogues. And with this generation, we also need to leverage the digital platforms to use and to mobilize the global youth engagement leading up for the events in 2025. So as the IMCS Pax Romana, during the Catholic Peace Forum and the Nagasaki Peace Forum, and together with the Summit of the Future, we also echoed the importance of nuclear disarmament, the non-violence, the social justice, and care for our environment. And these values align closely with the objectives of Summit of the Future and the needs for inclusive and youth-driven solutions. So we commit as the IMCS Pax Romana and the International Youth Training Center to amplify youth voices in shaping global agendas, to work together, advocate for nuclear disarmament, non-violence, and progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, and to strengthen the alliance to ensure the Summit of the Future outcomes, especially on the youth empowerment and climate action and global cooperation for future generations, to real actions or real change focused on justice, inclusion, and sustainability. So I guess this will be sharing and reflection from the movement, the youth group, IMCS Pax Romana, and IYTC to the Summit of the Future's outcome 2024. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very concise presentation, including concrete suggestion. There are three major opportunities next year. Is the FFD, in short, FFD, Finance for Development and Social Summit, and also COP. COP30 will go to Brazil next year. So this is another opportunity in terms of follow-up to Summit of the Future. Okay, thank you very much. And also thank you for hosting the Chiang Mai Global Governance Forum, which is Asia Futures Forum next year, January. So in Chiang Mai, IYTC. So I hope to see some of you to discuss, not in online, but it's a face-to-face in Chiang Mai next year. Okay, let's go to the last speaker, but not least, obviously, the Nikita from Russia. He's one of the Youth Peace Ambassador of Pyeongchang Odaesan Peace Platform. Okay, Nikita, you have a floor, please.
Yes, I hope you can see my presentation.
Yes, beautiful. Yep.
Thank you. Yes. So, good morning, everyone. As Mr. Lee said, my name is Nikita Baksorov, and I'm ambassador of Alliance of Youth Peace Ambassadors. Firstly, I would like to thank my colleagues for presenting their speeches and providing us information about the sections. And now I'm to share with you some thoughts about session 4. Like previous speaker, Bertha, she stated about more overall conclusion. I will try to go more in details. So as you know, the session 4 is about youth and future generations. It considers 4 actions from 34 to 37. And I decided to concentrate on each of it and highlight the most interesting parts for me. It doesn't mean that some of them are not important, but I just tried to address that something that was not stated too often before. So the action 34 states about the importance of investing in economic development of children and young people so they can reach their full potential. The first point is the proposal of creating global youth investment platform in order to attract funding for youth-related programs. I think it is quite a great idea due to the reason that sometimes United Nations facing problems of gaining this funding because member countries are using this as an instrument to influence the decision making. So it's the creation of the Global Youth Investment Platform could create more opportunities for more independent decision making. The second point is the support young people to pursue entrepreneurship and innovation in order to transform their ideas into viable business opportunities. As for me, it's one of the crucial issues and essential topics due to the reason that International Labour Organization analysis and statistics show that youth are the first to be fired during the economic crises, just like the one in 2008 has shown us. And many people go to business and become enterprisers not because not by choice, but because of necessity. So for me, it's one of the issues why we need to include more civil society into decision making. The third point that I will try to focus your attention on is to implement family-friendly and family-oriented policies that support the social and economic development of children and young people. I think it's also crucial because mutual understanding and consideration of children's interests are essential for their development in the future. One of the challenges we face here is early marriages. United Nations statistics show that today that estimated 650 million girls and women living today were married as a children. And of course, I think it's quite obvious and clear that not of them did them by their desire. Okay, so the Action 35 states about the concentrates on human rights, social inclusion, and integration. Here I decided to highlight the forced labor, gender stereotypes, and intergenerational solidarity. First, as you see the point, to educate forced labor and modern slavery and trafficking in persons. Forced labor seems to me one of the most difficult social problems because illegal profits by United Nations statistics in 2024 are the illegal outcomes from this activity are reaching to $236 billion in a year. The report of the United Nations also stated that almost 75% of these outcomes comes for sexual exploitation. And I think that this first point is connected with the second, is to address the challenges faced by all women and girls, including by combating gender stereotypes and negative social norms, because maybe also the practice in some countries where women doesn't have a voice, she doesn't have a rights, it just contributes to this problem. So, and the third point of the Action 35 I decided to point out is to strengthen intergenerational partnership and solidarity among generations by promoting opportunity for legal interactions. One of the most underappreciated works of the United Nations, because I think that we have to create opportunities for dialogue between youth and elderly people. I think it's one of the best chances to break the culture of stigma. And one of ideas, as for me, is to create like a social project. Is of course cannot combat the problem overall, but like to create a platform for meeting between representatives of orphanage homes and retirement homes in order for them to educate each other, because we know that many people in the elderly age, they are lonely and they often don't have an opportunity to communicate, because children and grandchildren are often busy with their work and busy with their families, like wife, children, and etc. So the next action is the Action 36. It's concentrate mostly on youth participation on national level. Here you see the points like to encourage people participate in various activities and increase more consideration of their youth considering decision making. So governments are encouraged to support mechanism at the national level to consult with young people. As for me, children and youth are agents of change, and this could be crucial because, in my humble opinion, often children and youth have more sincere opinion because they do not need to please the public. They do not need to be chosen, like to have a post, and they do not seek populist dems in order to gain more votes and popularity. So mostly topics that they try to raise, they facing them by themselves. And I think I can prove this opinion by just stating that we have many funds considering combating different diseases. And they often funded and created by people who somehow face the same diseases, like through the family or by themselves. And the same way I consider it is important to include more kids youth in not providing the opportunities to state their opinion. So the second point I decided to point out is to remove barriers that prevent the participation of youth. The participation of youth, but considering people who can be underrepresented in the youth groups, like people with disabilities, young girls, and etc. It is quite difficult topic as for me, because I'm not sure that many organizations and institutions will be willing to find, for example, a sign language interpreter for the sake of 1-2 employees. But anyway, I think that's work for organizations and for governments in order to include more people, for example, with young people with disabilities into decision making. And the third point is to support the youth-led and youth-focused organizations through capacity building. My proposal here and my reflection here is to create like some kind of movement for school kids, because often they have this energy, they have the ideas, but they just do not know where they can pursue their goals and where they can try to release their potential. Just, I think, create like government or, I don't know, regional movement for children to be included in different forums, I just think, or in planned tree activities. I think that many children could do this, because sometimes, just like in the small cities, I come from the small city, we just don't know where what we have to do. That's why I spend like always my time on the football field playing football. So the action 37, it's I point out the 3 points here also, but I would say that it's just focused mainly on participation of the youth level. It just in some way or another way touches the previous points, like to promote meaningful, inclusive, effective engagement of young people in United Nations bodies, to encourage the inclusion of youth in national delegations in United Nations, and to call for contributions youth fund to facilitate participations. It just mostly focuses on youthful participation at international level, because I think it's a great way maybe to foster youth international youth cooperation. Yes, if we have like problems considering cooperation on the elder level, maybe we could see some opportunities on the youth level. And the creation of future generations was divided into 3 parts: principle, commitments, and actions. You see that here I point out the principles. It's the topics that some way or another were raised up by United Nations body, and it's not surprising. But rather I find out that they started to talk more about particular attention on African countries. Like, yes, we have these problems with peacekeeping, human rights, ecology, but we need to focus, like pay particular attention to African countries. And considering youth activity, it may be important due to the reason that we know that in Africa is a fast-growing region. There comes a big amount of young people who have good ideas, but they just don't have, they don't have initiatives. They don't have opportunities to reach their potential. What Mr. Lee can prove my opinion that we conduct an essay contest, and our winner, when we said about that we need to engage more into network, like online network, she said that in some parts of her region, in her city, people do not have internet. So it's just an overall work we need to conduct. Considering commitments, you see, I also try to find some interesting one. It's like to protect indigenous people, so many historical inequalities, and to have urgent action to protect the environment. you see how different we have topics, and it's quite interesting that United Nations try to look at the problems from different perspectives, because we have a demography problem, but in some countries we have a growth of birth rate, and in some countries we have a decline of birth rate and also aging. So it just proves how different our world is, and how how specific programs and initiatives should be to combat these issues. Considering actions, I just made the conclusion that it's more about predictive steps and foresight through cooperation and innovation. So at the end of this annex, the countries also stated the importance to appoint a special envoy for future generations. I think it's quite curious topic, because it will be interesting for me what this special envoy, what's his plans and programs will be to include more youth, to empower youth in decision making. And the results of this work will be presented at the 83rd session, like in 5 years. I think it's a quite great event, you know, to be like pre-event before the conclusion of the SDGs. Like in 2028, maybe some results and some conclusions made by states can be early conclusions of the realizations of the 2030 SDGs. So, in my reflection, considering Declaration of Future Generations and Section 4, it's quite good that we have a declarations, but mandates and obligations may emerge only as a result of intergovernmental processes. It's quite great that we have this opportunity, because I work as a journalist, and sometimes when I have an interesting topic, I cannot publish it because the agency, it says that we have to publish it due to specific date. And maybe the conduction of more meetings of Summit of the Futures could provide us more, just provide more opportunities to publish more materials and to raise awareness about these problems. The second point for me is I hope that the points that was shared by United Nations countries will be honest and sincere, that countries will give funds to combat social tasks like health education, eradication of discrimination, and other topics. But we just see that today, like in the last 3 or 4 years, we have many conflicts, and I just think that in some cases, governments are more tend to spend funds and money on arms race rather combating like different social tasks. The third point is for me is I consider interesting. It's increased attention to attract and not saying funding for young people due to contradiction, due to strict battles between countries on international arena. The United Nations agencies like bodies, civil societies, countries state about the importance of finding new funds in order to continue realizing these problems. So particular attention on African countries, considering the action 34, 35, 36, and 37, and Declaration of Future Generations. Africa is no surprise. Africa is fast-growing region, so there will be a large number of young people in the near future. Youth to be included more in the national international decision making. I would like to believe that young people in the future will be more diplomatic. And the last but not the least is the awareness raising. As for me, is my conclusion, can be one of the most accessible tools of change. And it seems to me that it could be one of the solutions. And as you remember, I am member of Alliance of Youth Peace Ambassadors. So I am thinking also to providing to offer to Mr. Lee and maybe to our team information about conducting maybe lectures about United Nations internship, volunteer opportunities, like something that could include more youth into United Nations work, like providing their information where they can find where they can find these forums, where they can find these internship fellowships and programs. So of course, I think that maybe in some way it will also contribute to the possible outcomes that countries want to have, like by 2028. Thank you all for attention.
Hey, thank you very much, Nikita. Very concrete suggestion, and also we know very clearly the review will be this implemented will be 2028. So for your long-term planning, 2027 will be the third and the last SDG summit, and 2028 will be this review of the implementation of Declaration for Youth. So this, and before we reach 2030. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for the delay because I failed the time management. But I wanted to listen, fully, all your presentations. So that means we have the reduced time for your Q&A and then comment. And as I said, let me see the questions. There are a lot of questions in the chat box. I want to invite one after another, all the speakers to go through the chat box to find the relevant questions. And then maybe you can make a kind of in the form of concluding remarks, maximum 2 minutes. And your comments, and also the interventions and presentation from other speakers. So let me begin with the Ingo. Ingo, are you still there? Could you give us the response to the questions and also presentations overview?
Okay, so let me see my notes. So why there was less civil society participation? I would say the main reason is that the governments are more resistant now, or one could say one part of the governments don't want, especially the very autocratic. There was an attempt by the group led by Russia but also Cuba to reduce or to limit civil society participation, blaming it as more Western NGOs. But also there are other governments in this line from the group of the 77 and China. So, but then one could say also governments which are more friendly to civil society are actually not very clear. So, but that's a bit debatable. Whether, I mean, as a German, I was particularly frustrated with the Germany as a co-facilitator that they somehow did not include civil society more in this process. One might also argue that civil society was not well organized, but I don't think that's the main reason. So I mean, C4UN as a very big group which brought together many organizations we saw, but then there's the major groups and other stakeholders. Yeah, so there were different opinions also on the Nairobi conference. Okay, not to speak too long, maybe the contentious issues. I felt it was more before than actually afterwards. So the one is one part of civil society, especially the civil society FFD mechanism, they didn't want to participate at all because they didn't like the whole idea of this Summit of the Future. There were others. I mean, it was not only, let's say, between left and more moderate, but there were different views on the summit in general. But then particular issues were this approach of this Secretary General to do it as a multi-stakeholder approach. especially the role of private sector was a problem. We heard this also when we about the digital contract that the private sector played quite a strong role, so that was very problematic. Also the role of G20, the biannual summit, was a problematic one. Particularly then at the end in the Pact for the Future, it was said that the international financial institutions, World Bank and IMF, they were basically seen as the same level at the UN, like the UN. Probably that's not a contentious point, but still, part of civil society really didn't want to engage in such kind of process. I hope that it was good to hear from the different perspectives. As you said, we cannot cover all the points.
Yep.
I don't have any specific point now to add, so I
Yep.
think that should be okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ingo. So let's go to Alyn. Alyn.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anselmo. And I'll make a couple of points about civil society engagement and then a couple other points on the follow-up. Firstly, what we found is that the facilitators, of the various processes, because the facilitator for modality resolution, a facilitator for the Pact, facilitator for the Declaration of Future Generations, in general, they were very open and very helpful in facilitating civil society participation. There are a large number of interactive forums which we were able to participate in. There was invitations to write written comments. I think the one thing, though, that as civil society we need to constantly keep in our mind is that at the moment, the decision-making process of the UN is still nation-based, state-based on nation states as being the primary members. They were the ones who made the decisions. It wasn't the facilitators, on the final outcome documents. So as well as engaging through the processes at the UN, as civil society, we also have to do strong advocacy of our governments because they are the ones who are doing the voting, and we have to remember that. The second thing is, here is, I think, where there wasn't as much engagement as there should have been, and that's with policymakers, with the legislators. These are the national parliamentarians, these are the city councils and mayors, all those that are engaged in taking forward key policies, including the Sustainable Development Goals, ensuring government accountability, preparing budgets to take them forward. They need to be really engaged. And there wasn't a lot of outreach to the parliamentarians or to the parliamentary bodies. I think that could be increased. We're trying to do that with our network of parliamentarians, and we're going to the parliamentary bodies like the Interparliamentary Union, and they're starting to get involved, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and others. But that's really important to engage parliamentarians. Then just a couple of reflections on the outcome. I think there's two things which are really important with the sum of the future that are reflected in the whole process and the outcome, and that is a stronger emphasis on governance. There's a lot to do with, it's not just good enough to have governments, agreeing to commitments and treaties. We need to ensure that these commitments are implemented, and to do that, we need good governance mechanisms. We need to improve governance. And that's really good. And some was coming out of that. The International Court of Justice is just one of those, but also some of the UN ideas for enhancing the UN departments, those things. And the UN Envoy for Future Generations is one of these governance mechanisms, which we hope will be established soon. And this should not just be at the top level. This shouldn't just be, the UN appoints, someone to work at the UN level. This needs to be connected with representatives of future generations that are appointed by city councils, like Oxfordshire, for example, has one, by parliaments, by governments, and by regional bodies. We have a process now in the EU for a representative for future generations. So this is one of our main efforts in terms of the follow-up, is the further establishment of representatives of future generations at all levels, and that will really help ensure that when the UN envoy is appointed, it won't just be an empty, hollow figure. It'll be a really important process that will be done of cooperation at the UN level with grassroots, national and regional level as well. Thank you very much.
Let's Hideki.
Yes, I tried to answer Anselmo's question. I have two ideas. One is we should try to increase exchange and cooperation with the civil society of politically opposing countries such as China. For example, we have some exchange program with those Chinese NGO. I was the speaker at the event organized by the Chinese, and I explained the importance of, for example, human rights, democracy, these kind of values. And once they understand the importance of human rights and civic space kind of thing, they are the one who can decide which political system is better for their country. That's the end of the. And the other one is, as you know, for those who know about the business human rights, I think business could be responsible for the solving a structural problem, discrimination, civic space kind of thing. It's kind of beyond the business human rights. And they have the capacity to influence those kind of space to those the government. So I think it's still far away, but it's beyond business human rights. I think business could be responsible to stabilize the political situation in those countries in East Asia. Thank you very much. Back to Anselmo.
Okay, thank you very much, Hideki, especially business human rights. There can be also our strategy regarding the public-private partnership, which was highlighted by James, because in the digital business area, increasingly the public-private, but not so much CSO engagement, maybe there can be entry point, business human rights. Okay, thank you. So now, Gia.
Thank you, Anselmo. I have responded a couple of your questions in the chat, but overall, I think that the overall situation during the Summit of the Future and the energy was quite low because the world has been passing through a challenging time. The situation in Gaza, in Ukraine, Sudan, and Myanmar. So the United Nations Secretary General, at the time of adoption of the Pact for the Future, he said that we are bringing multilateralism from the brink. Means that the world was already quite down, and so is the situation with the civil society organizations. And civil society organizations were not allowed as compared to the Summit of the Future, as compared to the SDG summits in the previous years. And at the time of adoption of Agenda 23, I was eyewitness because there was lots of engagement of the civil society organizations as well as the private sector organizations. And we were also closer to the UN building, outside on the road. We were chatting and we were like shouting and everything. And that was quite a bigger energy. But during this Summit of the Future, we had a skit in the balcony of the UN Church Center right in front of the UN building. So that shows, the engagement, the poor engagement with the civil society, because we were not allowed. Earlier, I am witnessed that almost 10% per organization who have this ECOSOC status, special consultative status, they were allowed to bring almost 10%. But this time they did not allow more than 1 to 2 persons. And even if you have that status, you were not able to enter without any special ticket. And the special ticket was also for the 1 day in the UN Action Days, Summit of the Future Action Days. I've been in contact with many young people. They were saying that we are not allowed to enter into the UN headquarters. And some of them were saying that we were given access for only 1 day. So I think the spaces were quite shrinking, and most of the young people were complaining about the accessibility, the funding availability, and the visa provisions. So these were like the challenges that the civil society organizations were facing during this Summit of the Future. But to conclude, I think I would agree with Alyn that the real work actually starts at the national level, and the same was said by the Czech President Peter Pavel when he said that the real work begins at home in his speech during the Summit of the Future. So for all the civil society organizations as well as regional and global forums, I think we need to invest more on the national level. We need to engage with the parliamentarians, as rightly said by Alyn. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jia. Now, sorry for the delay, but James, are you still there?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, maybe a short comment, response to the questions. And
Yeah, I think essentially, my observation is there's been a general reduction of CSO engagement in this space for a variety of reasons. One of them, of course, is resources. And secondly, I think this space, especially around technology, is also being encroached or being competed with by for-profit social enterprises and small businesses who are forming a new ecosystem around technology companies. So I think we need to recognize that. And third, of course, this is very different from internet and social media era, So civil society digital transformation is either non-existent or has to be, it's very minimal. So if we are talking about capacity building, right, I think we need to think about a more consolidated, sector transformation, And at the moment, from our experience, we have designed 1 or 2 project proposals, sending it to the right people, so to speak, right, technology companies and all of that. And we have not been successful. Our pitch, it was really, okay, look, there's a lot of digital transformation of entities. We want to run a digital transformation program for CSOs in the region. And we also wanted to emphasize on those CSOs, focusing on the digital space, digital rights, because if we train them as a core group, right, they can go forth and multiply the knowledge for other elements of civil society working in other areas. Because if you start with the digitally fluent CSOs, right, it'd be easier to train them so they can go forward and carry. But we have not been successful to date. So, but of course, we'll keep at it. But I think those are areas to pay attention to.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, the Bertha, please.
Yes, so the question from chat box regarding the comments on Action 20 that talk about the youth, peace, and security. It's actually a good steps and positive for youth empowerment. But then when we look at the commitments, we should be also reflecting on how this commitment should follow by the implementation, the actionable implementation. So on the implementation plans actionable for youth together, how youth is not only including in the forum but also as or given the decision-making powers and how they are being we should also do the inclusive approach where youth that coming from indigenous or those who are in the conflict area are also empowered, and followed by the youth empowerment here when support for the youth in terms of the peace building initiative or funding and involvement at the monitoring and evaluations, and at the last how the government and international organization work together, partnership and collaborate with the youth group and civil society organizations. This would be crucial and important in terms of this commitments on Article 20. I think that's from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bertha. Now, Nikita.
Yes, so the question I have the same question as Bertha. Suggestions or comments about youth-related actions such as Action 20 to accelerate the implementation of commitments on youth peace and security. Actually, I think I have like 3 proposals. First is to conduct annual youth peace forums for youth collective advocacy. Secondly, it's many speakers said today that we don't have special accountability mechanisms and indicators to assess youth-related commitments. So maybe the creation of independent institution that will assess the implementation of these commitments could be necessary. And the third one is developing a digital youth peace network, youth networks, not peace, just digital youth networks, but more specific ones, because we have worldwide, like let's say like peace networks, but I think we need more like digital state networks, digital regional networks, and more specific networks about different topics. As Mr. Lee knows, I try to make researches about sport for peace and development, and sometimes it's difficult for me to find colleagues and different experts on this topic. So I would think that if United Nations were to create like youth expert group or youth task group on sport for development in peace, I would definitely apply. And this is my specific topic. But of course, many people from different regions, from different countries, they have their national specific ideas, topic specific ideas that they want to develop, but they just don't have the colleagues who could, and experts who could shape their project, who can shape their ideas. So that's maybe my proposals considering Action 20. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much for your good summary conclusion. Because it's already very late, so I do not want to take too much time, but briefly, 2 or 3 things. Number 1, I will compile all your presentations, make a summary report with the concrete proposals for our future follow-up. And number 2, we are all invited to Chiang Mai Global Governance Forum, January 13 to 15, where we are going to have a face-to-face meet. By that time, I'm sure there will be a lot more follow-up plans from different streams in the Summit of the Future. And then we will put together and then we will analyze, we will make a comprehensive, the action plan throughout the year, because there are so many meetings. Next year also we have a summit, we have a regular meeting here and there. That's why we need to be really, really strategic, because we have very limited resources, limited capacity. So you need to really choose and focus and then maximize our network, which has been developed over this Summit of the Future. The second one. So the one is thank you very much for all the contributions, your time, and apologies once again for the delay, in the time management. Okay, thank you. I hope to see you next time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, dear speakers. Goodbye.
Thank you very much indeed. Bye.
And then leave your emails if you have not registered so that I can send the report to you, Okay, thank you.
Thank you.